Hello and good afternoon. I am Mathilde Louise Nielsen. I am an event coordinator at the Danish Foreign Policy Society. I also chair our board in Aarhus of our branch over there. Today I welcome you to this event on EU enlargement policy. Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine sparked a new momentum for EU enlargement policy. And tonight we're going to discuss whether it's still merit-based or if geopolitics have taken over. Our moderator today is Marlene Wind, who is our professor here at University of Copenhagen. You're a leader of the Center for European Politics and PhD in European politics and everything. So we're in very good hands. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you very much. I don't know if it works. It does? Yes, great. That's a good thing. That's a good start. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm incredibly excited to have this discussion about European enlargement and also... it doesn't work? No, jeg skal ikke bruge den der. Nej. So I'm not using that one. Yes. I forgot about I already had one on. Yes. It's an incredibly great honor to have Frank Schimmelpfennig, professor at the Federal Technische Hochschule in Switzerland, actually. You are German, but you are a German working at a very distinguished university in Zurich. It's an enormous pleasure to welcome you here today. Frank and his enormous long publication list has influenced our students quite a lot here at the university. We tend to read quite a lot of your work, and we are very happy with it. And in particular, one article Frank wrote about geopolitics versus merit-based. Is it still merit-based, the enlargement? And that is really what we are going to discuss today. We are going to go a little bit into depth with not only the overall discussion about where the European Union is moving right now. It's so crazy what's happening that I almost had the feeling when I came here today that we had to discuss Donald Trump's plan instead. But maybe we will get into that as well. I think it's still incredibly important to have this discussion about what type of enlargement are we facing, and has geopolitics taken over, but also what union are we seeing out there in the future. And therefore, I'm incredibly happy you said yes, Frank, to come and discuss this with us today. The way we will do it is that we will have an introduction by Professor Schimmelpfennig for about 15 minutes, and then I will introduce our very distinguished panel to the stage as well, and then we will have a joint discussion, and we will continue in English because then we are still including Frank Schimmelpfennig, which I think would be stupid to have you here travel all the way and not being able to join our discussion. So I think I will give the floor to yours. I don't think I need to read up all your merits, but it's a very impressive CV you have, and it's all about differentiated integration, and something that I was really triggered by was this point you make in several of your contributions about the rhetorics of enlargement. So I hope you will say something about that, and I will give the floor to you now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marlene, for the kind introduction, and of course also for the invitation to Copenhagen. Very happy to be here, very honored to be here, and thanks to all of you for coming. I think this is a correct translation of the Danish title of today's event, EU enlargement, merit, or geopolitics. How did we get there? It is actually rather recent that we speak of enlargement again. I basically started my academic career as an enlargement scholar in the late 1990s. But for a long time, I gave up the topic because basically nothing was happening. So the last country that joined was Croatia, 2013. Since then, we have not really seen much progress in the Western Balkans, even though the Western Balkans countries have had an official membership perspective to join the EU. And when we look at the so-called Eastern Partnership countries, that's Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Belarus, these countries did not even have a membership perspective. That all changed with the Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Very quickly, the EU moved towards giving the so-called association trio, Georgia, Moldova, Ukraine, not only a membership perspective, but also an official candidacy status. Such a status was given to Bosnia-Herzegovina, and in the case of some of the Western Balkans countries, the EU finally overcame some blockages it had and agreed to start accession negotiations with Albania, Moldova, North Macedonia, and Ukraine. And in its most recent report and communications, the enlargement commissioner even said, well, there is quite a prospect of concluding these negotiations with Montenegro already next year maybe, and with Albania maybe in 2027. So there has been, let's say, a complete change of speed when it came to EU enlargement after the full-scale invasion. Now, of course, the question is, how could that happen? And there has been quite a debate also in policy circles, but also in academic circles, whether that means that, let's say, the basic logic of enlargement might have changed. That it's still EU enlargement, but it is now conducted for very different reasons. And this, and here we can think of a possible change in logic from a transformative to a geopolitical enlargement. So the traditional, you could call it a paradigm of enlargement, was one of Europeanization. The idea was, okay, the accession process, and it's a long process, as you know, is a process in which the candidate countries adopt the values and norms and policies of the European Union. And once they have done that, once they've successfully concluded this Europeanization process, they are worthy members of the European Union. So the main purpose was the domestic transformation of formerly mainly communist or authoritarian countries to liberal democratic countries, and the regulatory alignment of these countries with the European Union, which of course is defined by its acquis communautaire, and part of the accession process is the change of domestic laws in line with the EU laws. With the goal of, say, bringing new member states into the fold of the European Union as liberal democratic countries, as market economies, following EU policies. That was supposed to be a gradual, slow process of rule adoption. under a mechanism of conditionality. Yeah? The idea was, okay, we offer you membership. Yeah? That's basically the carrot. Yeah? And under the condition that you abide by our values, norms, and rules. And if you do that, yeah, you can become a member. If you don't, yeah, then there's the stick. You stay outside. So we can. The assumption was, okay, the more countries would democratize, the more they align themselves with the rules of the European Union, the faster they become members. Okay, that was considered to be the gist of enlargement in the 1990s and 2000s. Now, the puzzle was, I mean, where does this new activity actually come from when we see, well, these countries have not really made huge progress, yeah, in the, let's say, early 2020s, but still now they are offered a membership perspective. They are invited to start accession negotiations. So maybe we've seen a shift, yeah, let's say, in the motivation for EU enlargement. And here, a lot of people now discuss this under the theme of geopolitics, yeah, where the purpose of enlargement is not any more primarily, yeah, to transform non-member states domestically into consolidated liberal democracies, but where it is about, let's say, a geopolitical competition over the Eastern European space, where the question is, okay, who belongs to our camp and who belongs to the camp of the Russians, or maybe even to some extent the Chinese. So it's about international demarcation. It's about, okay, where does Europe end and how far does the power of the EU reach? And it's not so much anymore about regulatory alignment, but rather strategic alignment. Yeah? Basically buying into the foreign policy of the European Union, aligning yourself with the foreign policy of the European Union towards Russia, towards other places, rather than aligning yourself to, let's say, the market rules of the European Union. And now, in this geopolitical paradigm, the idea is, okay, what is important now is that we stabilize regimes in our neighborhood, that we promote and support their territorial consolidation against incursions from the outside, and to deny foreign powers control over European territories. Now, in this geopolitical paradigm, what that would require is actually moving fast, yeah, rather than gradually, yeah, to counter the military threats that these countries face and to not subject them to conditionality, yeah, but rather to assist them financially and militarily. And that also means, okay, under what conditions do countries then become members? Well, they become members if they strategically align themselves with the European Union, if they are basically on our side, so to say, and if they are under some kind of military threat. Now, these are, of course, types. Yeah, this is reality is always a bit more complicated, but the idea was, okay, we're shifting, yeah, from this transformative idea of enlargement to one that's much more geopolitical, where the EU pays more attention to, let's say, the geopolitical strategic alignment and the military threats to these countries than to their domestic transformation. As I said, I mean, these are two different views, yeah, and of course they are in some kind of competition, yeah, and the question, of course, is to what extent will the EU move one or rather the other side? Now, if you read documents of the European Commission, yeah, there doesn't seem to be any kind of contradiction between these two views. Yeah, I mean, in the view of the Commission, it all goes together really nicely. Yeah. These are just some quotes from the 2025 communication on enlargement just a few weeks ago, yeah, where it says, okay, geopolitical challenges have strengthened Europe's unity of purpose, and enlargement is a key geopolitical tool that we use because it contributes to our joint safety, prosperity, and security. So that really reads like this geopolitical logic, but then the Commission continues the rule of law, fundamental rights, the functioning of democratic institutions, and so on. They remain the fundamentals of the accession process because they reflect our EU values and principles, and the enlargement process remains strict, fair, and merit-based, based on the objective progress achieved by each enlargement country. Yeah? So what we clearly see is that in the EU, these two logics are clearly perceived as being there, yeah? But I say as a good administrative unit, as a good European organization, yeah, of course you try to portray them as, okay, we can do everything at once. Yeah? Now, the question is that also how the EU is behaving? And here I want to just show you some data. So this is the development of liberal democracy in each year among all of the Eastern European potential candidate countries. Yeah? So this is basically it's a pool of 24 countries in Eastern Europe, and we can see how liberal democracy in these countries has developed over time. And clearly, I mean, the story is clear. 1980s, still under communism, liberal democracy was extremely weak. Then we have this, the revolutions in Eastern Europe, yeah, bringing liberal democracy to a higher level. You also see the dots at the very top. Yeah, that's the Central European countries, the forerunners of democratic transition. Of course, when these become member states, yeah, the average drops, yeah, because they are now not in the pool anymore. What we then see is after the Eastern enlargement, for the rest of the potential member states, liberal democracy actually goes down. Yeah? So on average, the current candidates are from a liberal democracy point of view in a much worse shape, and actually in a deteriorating shape, yeah? In comparison with the Eastern enlargement period of the 1990s and early 2000s. Now, ideally, according to the transformative logic, yeah, this should then also be reflected in their integration status, yeah, how close they are to becoming members. But what you can see here, and this is basically a measurement of their integration status, which ranges, let's say, from simple trade and cooperation agreements via association agreements to candidacy status, start of accession negotiations, and when you're at one, yeah, then you're a member. Yeah. So here again, what we see, yeah, we see this increase in status also in the 1990s, 2000s. Yeah, that shows the enlargement process of the time, but what we see is that this has continued. Yeah, so there has, of course, again been a drop in 2004, but for the remaining countries, yeah, this has on average increased. So what you can actually see is an increasing gap, yeah, between the integration status that's the Eastern European countries have, that's the blue line, yeah, and their average level of liberal democracy. So we still see both have really gone together well in the 1990s up to Eastern enlargement. We also see a similar drop, yeah, in 2004. But then since 2010, yeah, we see that while liberal democracy has actually, on average, slightly deteriorated in the region. Their integration with the European Union has advanced, yeah? And that's what I would call the merit gap in Eastern enlargement. That's even more pronounced if you just focus on those countries that are still non-members to this day. Yeah? So those countries that have never become members and have never dropped out of the pool of potential member states, yeah? Where you see how over time their liberal democratic development has, on average, stagnated, yeah? Whereas they have moved closer and closer to the European Union. And here are just some examples of candidate countries where you can see this quite nicely. Yeah, that how, for instance, in the case of Albania, yeah, the two lines went together well until the early 2000s. Yeah, but since then have gone in different directions. Bosnia, very similar. Macedonia with a bit of ups and downs in its democratic development. Moldova is the only country where I can actually see, yeah, that status increases have been paralleled, yeah, by advances in its democratic development. You also see a little uptick in the case of Montenegro. Serbia is the most drastic case of where its status has improved hugely over time, yeah, whereas the country has become more and more authoritarian. Turkey is a similar case, yeah. And in the case of Ukraine, yeah, which is clearly the pivotal country in this new enlargement round, we also see that the increase in its in the depth of its integration with the European Union has in no way been matched by the democratic development of the country. Okay, that was. I just wanted to show this in case there's a majority of social science students in this room. That's not the case, so I skipped this. And so, what do we see? We see that the relationship between liberal democracy and integration has severely weakened since the mid-2000s. Yeah? So in the 1990s, early 2000s, we could really see this clear correlation, yeah, of democratic consolidation, advances of the rule of law, and everything else with how close these countries moved towards membership in the European Union. Now, also in our statistical analysis, we do not find any clear correlation between how democratic a country is and how far advanced it is on the way to membership. So we've seen that current non-member states have mostly seen their institutional status increase despite democratic stagnation or backsliding even. Yeah, that's what I would call the merit gap. That has three reasons. Yeah, one is that even if a country is rewarded with a higher status because it has introduced democratic reforms, think of Turkey, yeah, in the early 2000s. Once it backslides, the EU usually doesn't punish these countries by kicking them out again. Yeah? So formally, Turkey is still a candidate country in accession negotiations. Serbia is still a candidate country pursuing its accession negotiations further. Yeah? The EU rewards, but it doesn't punish. Also, we've seen that the EU has used, let's say, ever more institutional benefits as some kind of a consolation prize. Yeah? That is, the EU was reluctant to offer any of these countries membership, but of course the EU wanted to keep these countries engaged. Yeah? It wanted to make sure, okay, wanted to send them signals. Look, you still have a membership perspective, and we want to make sure that you're part of our camp. Yeah, so we give you things like candidacy status. Yeah, that hadn't existed before. It was invented basically for Turkey, yeah, to please Turkey at some point when the EU had to tell Turkey, look, we're not starting accession negotiations with you. So it increases these institutional arrangements as some kind of a consolation prize for these countries if they cannot be awarded with membership. And then clearly, and that's what we've seen in the last round, the EU has responded to geopolitical pressures. Yeah, it makes what is in the end a symbolic gesture, yeah, giving countries candidacy status is a symbol in the end. Yeah, so it in response to these geopolitical pressures to keep them basically in their own camp, it also increases their institutional status. At the same time, I mean, the EU has been very careful not to grant membership to countries with low democratic quality. So I think we cannot accuse the European Union of not giving membership to countries that would actually have deserved it, yeah? Because looking, let's say, at the liberal democratic record, none of these countries has actually really deserved membership at this point. Yeah? But still, making these promises all the time, giving these countries a higher status, yeah, candidacy status, or start accession negotiations, opening this chapter and that chapter. Of course, that creates expectations about progress towards membership. And if these expectations are not met at some point, yeah, that creates frustration, yeah, that creates disappointment. And that might discourage well-meaning actors in the candidate countries, yeah, who see, well, whatever we do, there's always going to be a member state that will veto our membership. But it has also emboldened autocratic actors in these countries, yeah, basically telling their people, look, the road to the EU will lead you nowhere. Yeah? It doesn't pay off, yeah, to invest in the rule of law, but we offer you an alternative way. So that's a bit the quandary the EU is in. And that creates, for the European Union at this point, an enlargement dilemma between the merit-based or the geopolitical option. Yeah? So I'm not at all with the European Commission basically saying we can paper over these differences, yeah, and make it all happen at the same time. It is a true dilemma. If the EU was fully in favor of going merit-based, yeah, it would, of course, preserve its high-value standards. It would only admit countries that fulfill the conditions, yeah, that are liberal democracies, fight corruption, have a working system of the rule of law. What that would mean, however, is that enlargement would not happen at all, or it would happen, let's say, in a very distant future that we cannot foresee at that point. On the other hand, if the EU went fully geopolitical, yeah, it could, of course, let's say, take these countries in, provide protection against outside influences, and that would create a very extensive enlargement with, I don't know, 8 or 9 new member states. But this would be an enlargement that would come very fast and would have the prospect of actually fully overburdening or paralyzing the European Union. So the dilemma is that choosing one of these sides, yeah, is actually very likely to leave the EU with nothing at all. If it went, let's say, for the merit-based option, that I also called going down gracefully, it would mean basically geopolitical irrelevance of the European Union, but also not progress in the candidacy countries. Yeah? If it went, let's say, fully in the geopolitical direction, again, it would not have a strong effect on liberal democracy in these countries because the conditionality would be undermined. Oops. Let's see. But it might actually be the case. I mean, if the EU admitted all of these countries for geopolitical reasons, it would be internally so weakened that it couldn't really act as a geopolitical actor, which would have been, say, the reason to do it in the first place. So I think there is a true dilemma, yeah, that the EU has to solve. The question is, how can it do it? And this is going to be my last couple of remarks. So I mean, it's not an easy choice, but I think what could be done is moving in the direction of some kind of differentiated accession for these remaining European candidate countries. What we mean by differentiated accession is some kind of selective, partial, and maybe even reversible participation in EU policies and institutions before or after formal accession to the EU. The EU would move away, let's say, from a membership that would say you're either fully in or you're fully out, yeah, towards some kind of fuzzy membership, yeah, where you're partly in or partly out. That is nothing new, yeah. So that's not a new invention. So every new member state, say very few, if any, new member states were fully in from day one of their membership. Yeah, we've seen, as you all know, there are transitional arrangements, for instance, with regard to labor markets, yeah, where for 7 years or so, the citizens of new member states do not enjoy the full rights of movement in the European Union. So it builds on an existing system of differentiated integration. This is also how the EU could preserve some of its democracy membership conditionality once after countries become members. It would allow for faster enlargement progress with intermediate benefits without compromising values. That would be the idea, at least. Would also put weaker demands on the EU's integration capacities because the new member states would not participate in all of the policies at once. And what is very important, it would allow for some mutual trust building, yeah, because now the issue is that the old member states do not really trust the candidates fully. Yeah, will they, once they become members, will they stay on the path of reform? Or once they are in, they will basically forget about their commitments. And of course, the example of Hungary is on everyone's mind. Yeah. It would also allow, let's say, the new member states to become more and more socialized into the way that the EU works. And another beauty of this solution would be that actually no treaty change is needed, yeah, because all of that can be negotiated in the context of the accession treaties. So there are basically 3 different options that are being discussed or that have been introduced also to some extent. One is called by the European Commission gradual integration, which means an intensified pre-accession participation of non-members in EU policies. Yeah? So while countries are still non-members, they increasingly participate in the internal market, they increasingly receive benefits from the cohesion policy, they participate, for instance, in the EU's foreign policy, energy policy. Yeah? All of that is possible already when they are non-members. There are clearly some advantages because it provides some benefits to candidates whereas the EU is not very much affected because these countries in the end remain non-member states. On the contra side, I would say, however, that this is not the kind of EU commitment to membership that the candidate countries seek. Yeah? It still doesn't provide them with the commitment, yeah, to membership that they want. And actually, the candidate countries are already quite far advanced on this way to participation in these policies. The other option is post-accession exclusion from EU policies. This is what we've seen in the past quite a lot. Yeah? Countries join with full rights, full institutional rights of members, yeah, voting rights and everything, but they are excluded from certain policies, from Schengen, from the euro, which for them, the positive thing is that their membership is secured. All of these exclusions, exemptions are temporary, yeah, they end at some point. And for the old member states of the EU, it allows them to postpone some costs of enlargement, like the inclusion of these countries in the common agricultural policy, for instance. But I would argue that this very traditional way of integrating new members is not enough at this point, because most of the concerns that the old member states have not so much to do with the policies, but more with the institutions, with voting, decision-making procedures. Yeah? There's a lot of concern about will these countries use their vetoes, yeah, to block our decision-making processes even more. Also has to do with the rule of law, where the EU does not really have strong mechanisms, yeah, to rein in backsliding countries. And this is why there are new proposals, yeah, for instance, in the context of the staged accession proposal that CEPS has made, where countries would get a dedicated new membership status. And that would not only exclude them from some policies, but actually also from institutional rights, yeah? Like the right to veto, maybe also lesser rights when it comes to institutional representation, maybe more rule of law scrutiny, and the Enlargement Commissioner, for instance, has already talked about reversibility, yeah, which would be new. You would be let in, but at some point you could also be kicked out again if you don't follow the rules. I mean, probably very hard to do. The downside here is that this might easily be perceived or run into some kind of second-class membership. But I guess we can certainly discuss these options following. So let me conclude. What I wanted to show you is that there is an enlargement dilemma, and as the EU is moving towards accepting new members, yeah, I think it is likely to do so by the end of the decade, if only to show that it is serious about enlargement. This enlargement dilemma at some point will come to a head and cannot be papered over, as we see it now in the official communications of the European Commission. We also will face increasing geopolitical pressures. They will not go away. They will increase, if anything, whereas we have to face that democratic quality in these countries will remain low. This is nothing that can be fixed quickly. These are, let's say, low democratic quality countries, even if they try hard. And that is why I think that differentiated accession with a formal new member status is required to keep the EU both geopolitically relevant, but also institutionally protected. And with that, and with apologies for running over my time, I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much can I call you Frank, or is
Sure,
it?
sure, yes.
Okay, so you're not that German. So you would normally say Professor.
Professor Doctor,
Schimmelpfennig.
yeah.
Thank you. No, but I found this wonderfully provoking.
I have to.
What you presented here. In particular, and I would like to open the floor in just a second afterwards, but I'll just start with some questions, and then you can maybe, either respond or you can think about it and then come back to it. But what I really liked about it was that you were so incredibly provoking and frank, because coming to Denmark, which is probably the most pro-enlargement country in the entire union, and we have the presidency right now, it's you almost get hanged for saying anything that is not pro-enlargement. So I think it was very refreshing to hear your view on this. I will, however, challenge you a little bit. First of all, isn't it really just old news, this idea about widening versus deepening? I mean, also in 2004, you had a debate about the same thing, where you had countries, at that time it was Denmark and the UK, who wanted enlargement because we hoped that it would mean widening and a looser cooperation, while France and others were more interested in deepening. So I really think that we have already been in this dilemma before. It's not new. So that would probably be my first question. And also at that time we didn't really manage it, because we got Trojan horses into the union, right? And I actually quite disagree with you in terms of whether the EU has the tools. I think it's the will that is lacking. It's not the tools. The EU has infringement procedures. They have rule of law tools. They have preliminary references. They have so many possibilities already, also Article 7, but they are not using them. So I think it's more a lack of will, and that is actually something I would really like to ask you. Where does this lack of will come from? So I think that would be my first two questions to you. And do you prefer to answer, or should we open up for?
That is your choice.
I think it's my job. Yes, I think you should answer, and then I will ask you to think about.
Okay. So clearly, I'm aware that this is a pro-enlargement place, and I am pro-enlargement too. Yeah, I'm just concerned about making it work. But my understanding is also that Denmark, other Nordic countries are also very much concerned about the rule of law,
absolutely.
right?
Yes.
Which is not the case everywhere in the European Union. And so you have this dilemma right at your front door, right? If you're pro-enlargement, but you also want to make sure, okay, the new member states will abide by the rule of law. Yeah, I mean you're right there. Yeah, and you need to think about ways how to reconcile these two demands. And this is not about widening versus deepening. This is about widening together with preserving, say, the normative community of the European Union, or a widening that massively increases the political heterogeneity within the EU. This is not about deepening. That's not my concern. And I think this dilemma, maybe in hindsight we would say it's not new, but in the early 2000s, when the decision was made for Eastern enlargement, this dilemma was not there, because the assumption, the conviction was, okay, these new member states that we will let in, they have reached the end of their process of liberal democratic consolidation, and there's no turning back. Okay, we've learned that this was an optimistic assumption, and of course we shouldn't just look at the new member states, because the rule of law, liberal democracy is under pressure everywhere in the European Union. And I think that explains part of the lack of the will. That of course it is not this self-evident truth anymore in the European Union. And then I think, yes, I would agree the tools are in principle there, but of course if for Article 1 you need basically a consensus minus one, this is a situation that we will not have in the European Union in the foreseeable future. That there will not be at least one other country that will protect Hungary or other Article 7 offenders.
Good. So let's open the floor and we will collect a few questions so that we don't get too long comments. Please say who you are, and we'll start up there, and then we have one here. Present your, yes, you're on the green shirt.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
No. My name is Frederik Damgaard, and I previously worked in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and served in the Balkans also. So
Speak up, please. I can't hear you.
Yeah, I think it's a very timely topic that you picked up here today, and I just think I share your analysis of the problem, but on the solution regarding the gradual integration, first of all, I think it's isn't it already happening with SEPA and the growth plan and all of these things? I think it's people in the Commission would probably say that they're already doing this. Secondly, I think the question of gradual integration is difficult for the leaders of the Balkans to sell. If we're calling it a fuzzy membership, I'm afraid they can't see where the carrot is anymore. And thirdly, on this gradual integration, I just think, I'm not sure it will solve the dilemma that you presented very nicely. I think that it just pushes it further ahead. So I would ask you whether we need to have some kind of deeper, more normative approach to the dilemma. Do we need to choose between these two things, or can we find a way to bridge the gap without just papering over the issues, as you said? Thank you.
Thank you, and then we take another one here, and then you can get a chance to respond. Jeg skal bare lige spørge.
René Christoffersen, jeg er som privatperson bare interesseret i, well, I'm here as a private person and just interested in foreign policy. On one of your slides, you mentioned that without enlargement, the EU will be geopolitically irrelevant. You could say it is already irrelevant because who's sitting on the table now? It's countries, it's France, UK, and maybe Germany, who's discussing the future of Ukraine together with the US. So why do you say it's will become irrelevant when, to my mind, it is already irrelevant?
Thank you. Did you get the questions, the two questions?
Yeah.
Good.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you said, isn't it all still happening, already happening? Yes, the gradual integration, that's basically Commission policy. But what the Commission understands by gradual integration remains below the threshold of membership. It's basically giving non-member states a lot of benefits, integrating them informally into many policies. That, of course, is beneficial, but it will only go so far, because what these countries actually want is not gradual integration for its own sake, but as a stepping stone towards full membership. And this is what this gradual integration might help with, but does not really lead to in the end. I think you're touching upon a very important issue. Is some kind of that, let's say, fuzzy membership or new membership status? is that actually still attractive, yeah, for the candidate countries? Is that still a carrot, as you said? Well, I think if you put it very bluntly, yeah, if the non-member states are faced with a choice between getting into the European Union with, say, reduced benefits with lesser rights, rather than staying outside, yeah, until there is, let's say, a consensus within the EU to let them in, yeah. At least if I was a leader of a Western Balkan or Eastern European countries, I would say, let us get in. Because it is also a learning experience from earlier new member states. Once you're in, you are in a much better position, yeah, to basically fight for your demands and for your interests than as an outsider. Yeah. So if that is the choice, if that is the stark choice in front of the leaders of the candidate countries, I think it could still be a winning proposition for them. But clearly, they don't like it. Yeah, that's for sure. Does it solve the dilemma? I mean, I think it's a way to reconcile a little bit the extremes. Sure, it's pushing it further into the future, but I think it at least secures the geopolitical status of these countries. As a member of the European Union, they are not in that gray zone anymore between the EU and Russia. I think that's a very different starting point for them, and it gives them and the EU additional time, yeah, basically to build mutual trust, to strengthen the institutions. So I think, while of course in the end it will not completely overcome the dilemma, I think it's a productive way forward that should be in the interest of both sides. And is the EU not already geopolitically irrelevant? Well, definitely not in the European region. Yeah? I think here with the right policy, it's definitely able to make a difference. I mean, I understood your point as saying, well, isn't it all down to basically the E3, yeah, France, Germany, and it's not the EU? Was that your point?
If you're looking
Yeah.
at what's going on right now,
Yeah.
it's just a confirmation. What's really counting that it's countries.
Yes.
It is old countries with nuclear weapons, and then partly also Germany, because you have to pay at the end of the way.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, anyway. So you have a place at the table. Otherwise, you wouldn't get a place at the table. So if you don't have an army, the EU doesn't have an army. I would say the only argument for including Ukraine is because they have a huge army. Together with Poland, then we have an army.
Yeah.
Okay. Germans, you cannot really, you cannot say that you have an army to provide security for Ukraine.
Yeah.
Right now.
Okay, I mean, it's very hard to contradict you, yeah. But I would still say, I mean, when you look at the actions of Germany and France, I think the aim is still to act as, let's say, speakers for Europe. I mean, they still have this agenda of not just being Germany or just being France, yeah, but acting, say, as this spokespersons for the European Union, even if it's not the European Union as such, yeah, that has the power. It's developing that to some extent, yeah, but you're absolutely right. It's a struggle. Yeah.
And then you haven't answered why would the change in enlargement change the weight of the EU geopolitically? You haven't answered that question.
Well, it would include these countries in the European Union. Otherwise, it might very well be that these countries will be absorbed by other powers, and then these other powers will be at the borders of the European Union. That is the security rationale of a geopolitical enlargement. Yeah? You basically gain control over territory that would otherwise be occupied or dominated by your rivals.
No, please, I need to ask you to ask for a microphone. And we don't want this to be a dialogue between the two of you. So you can raise your hand again, and then we have several others who have raised their hand. I think it was Matthias first, and then behind you, and then, yes, down here. So we collect 3 questions, and then we get back. And you're most welcome to come back. But you need a microphone, because it's live streamed. So say your name and...
Thank you so much. My name is Mattis. I'm a former student here and now working with the Ministry for Foreign Affairs. And I wanted to ask you, because of course this question about reopening the treaty or reviewing it in some way is a hot potato. And you mentioned earlier that it might be possible to do this without reviewing the treaty. I just wanted to hear your reflections on that and why you have come to that conclusion. Thank you.
And just behind you, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Trygve Ugland. I'm from Bishop's University in Canada, currently a guest researcher at the University of Copenhagen. And I'm also Norwegian. I'm Canadian and Norwegian, and I had a great pleasure of listening to you in the late 1990s, analyzing the 2004 enlargement in Oslo at Arena, and where you separated between logic of expected consequences and logic of appropriateness. And I was just wondering, in this perspective, merit versus geopolitics, where are norms? Where is the moral duties for enlargement? I saw that you mentioned assistance under the umbrella of geopolitics, but I'm wondering if there is a third dimension, merit, norms, and geopolitics. And I cannot help myself since I am Canadian and Norwegian. Wouldn't Canadian membership in the European Union be pretty good from this perspective?
Wow, yeah. Thank you. We'll just take the ambassador down here. Yeah, well, just a second before you need the microphone because we live stream. So sorry to be a bit strict here.
Thank you. Ambassador of Georgia. I've obviously noticed here that in your comparison of the graph where you showed 8 candidate countries, Georgia was missing, perhaps not intentionally, but because of the structure of the graph. But I can imagine how it would look in that kind of picture. But I thought, first commenting on the dilemma that you have mentioned, perhaps it is both. It's not just geopolitics or just merit, it's both, because in a way there is a, we see it as a swinging, sometimes it's merit, sometimes it's geopolitics, sometimes it's both, and Georgia is a kind of a case, hot potato case at the moment, which is discussed widely in many ways, but I think what you didn't mention, that on the merit side, when we apply, or EU applies standards to assessing the merit in terms of performance of different countries against various criteria, we in Georgia have a feeling that this is not always the same standards which are applied to those countries. And we feel, you mentioned rule of law as a very important one. Georgia stands much above all candidate countries and perhaps some even member countries of EU in the rule of law, but yet it is all the time criticized on the rule of law and things like that. So what are other drivers there other than merit and geopolitics, or what aspects are there also that determine our future?
Yeah. Thank you very much. I'll give you the word, and when you have answered, we will jump directly to the panel without any break, because we are running a little bit late. So, yes.
Yeah, on the question of treaty change, yeah, I mean, that's of course one of the big issues. You might be aware of this Franco-German reflection paper about enlargement that actually said, okay, we need to use the enlargement also to fix the treaties, and we need treaty change as a precondition for future enlargement. Now, pragmatically speaking, I would say if you make enlargement conditional on treaty change, on a formal treaty revision, you're not going to have enlargement at all, because I don't see especially with regard to the points that were mentioned there, I don't see the consensus for a treaty change in the context of enlargement, because it would basically require, to put it very bluntly, Hungary to give up its veto in return for having countries in that it doesn't want in anyways, like Ukraine. Yeah, so that's currently, I don't think this is going to work. I think what is going to work is if you want to introduce changes that only affect the new member states, you can do that in the context of an accession treaties, as it has been done before. As long as it doesn't affect the old member states, I think that is technically at least feasible. Yeah? And this is also what would work, I think, in the context of enlargement. Okay, you talked about moral duties. Well, I think you can see moral duties both in the merit-based part and in the geopolitical part, yeah, because I think one can also say it's a moral duty, yeah, of Europeans, yeah, to support governments, countries, citizens, yeah, basically that fight for, in the end, fight also for our values and our security. Yeah, that can also be construed as a moral duty. So that's not how I would say develop the difference between these two logics. And yeah, I mean there has been a quick flurry of debate on Canadian membership in the EU. Yeah, that I haven't heard about this for a long time anymore, but clearly. I'm not sure whether the EU would need to change its treaties for that, because the treaties say it's European countries. Yeah? But maybe we can be inventive and have a broad tent of what is European. Yeah, so I don't know.
Could start with Norway.
Norway, yeah. I mean, I think you're perfectly right. I mean, that's what I also try to show. When the EU, at least after 2010 or so, we don't really see a clear connection between, let's say, the merits and the institutional status that countries get. Yeah, it's a bit all over the place. So if you use data for this, yeah, expert data measurements, and the Commission always likes to say we use objective criteria. Yeah? So if you I would say that these clear and consistent standards have not existed anymore already for a very long time. And as you know very well, there are bilateral issues that come in the way, names, borders, cultural, ethnic minorities, yeah, all of that comes in the way of the formally objective fundamentals. Yeah. Now, I don't think that this would let Georgia off the hook, because clearly Georgia has, for a long time, had a very good rule of law record, also recognized by experts. But I'm afraid this is a bit a thing of the past, yeah, given the developments in the past year. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Don't you want to join me in giving a big applause to you?
Yeah. Thank you for your questions. Yeah.
And then, if I could ask the other very distinguished panel to come up here, and I will start by introducing all of you. We simply decided, I hope it's okay for you, not to have a break, because otherwise we will probably lose time and also lose a little of the suspense. Thank you very much. And Frank, you just stay up here, right?
We can share.
Yeah?
No problem.
Yeah,
I think you should stay
Yeah,
because
okay.
we want you to include you in the discussion, right? Yeah. So first here I have Zlatko Jovanovic, who is a West Balkan expert from the University of Copenhagen and Aarhus. Is that correct?
No, I only have loose connection to the University
Yes,
of Copenhagen.
yes.
So, yes.
And we're so happy to have you here and to have this area covered, not just talking about Ukraine. So thank you very much for being here. Next to Zlatko, we have Iben Schake Barfod, who comes from the think tank Europe and is an analyst there and follows very closely enlargement and the institutional perspective in particular. Yes. So thank you to you as well. Wonderful to see you here. And then we have, of course, the one and only director of the Udenrigspolitisk Selskab, what is it called? Foreign Policy Society? Yes. And you just came home from Vietnam, I heard. I was very envious. And you have a long history in traveling and doing research in Eastern Europe. And probably speaks all the languages. Not quite. But yes. But I won't say thank you because you're a co-organizer. So thank you for coming. I would say thank you for hosting together with me. And then we have been so incredibly lucky when I suggested to invite Ole Mikkelsen, former ambassador in Ukraine. I was sure you would say no. But I was so happy when I saw that you actually said yes. So welcome so much, and you're still working in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in defense industry area.
Now I'm doing weapons.
Yes, you're doing weapons.
Yep.
You're one of the bad guys.
Yep.
Yes. Thanks to all of you for coming, and I think that we will jump right into it, and I will simply give you the opportunity to maybe comment on some of the things that have been debated so far, both from the audience and also from Frank Simmelfennig. What's your take on all of this? And where do you see, for instance, the Balkans? And then we will, of course, continue with a not too long intervention, maybe 3 minutes or something, and then we will, of course, come back to the audience. But Zlatko, would you start? Where are the West Balkans in all this? Where do you see them moving? We saw some rather terrifying graphs here with deteriorating democratic situation, but actually at the same time they have been raided and moved closer and closer to the European Union, but their democracy has gone down. How do you see that?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to distinguish between different countries. We are talking about 6 different countries that have had quite different developments, and sometimes it could go rather well in one country while it's going the opposite way in the other country. The very first slide is being shown, Serbia was not there, and I thought okay, very interesting, because these countries are on the way in for the negotiations, and these countries are maybe on the way to become full members, and Serbia is not there. Not long ago, there was an idea that Serbia will be a member country by 2025, which is now. And that was at the time when Serbia was probably closer to membership than now. But the things were not going just one way. There's always the gap between perception and reality in one way, but also the approach to, and I'm very much agreeing on the thing that there is a difference between democratic development and approachment to the EU. And if I may just show a couple pictures to illustrate what I'm talking about here, I'll start with this one. This is an article from 2018,
wow.
where there was a debate of whether, how Aleksandar Vučić, the president of Serbia at the moment, became Europe's favorite autocrat. We've been talking about this for a long time, talking about the idea of Europe in the end either intentionally or unintentionally supporting development of stabilitocracy in these countries, where stability is the major achievement goal rather than democracy. And in that way, Vučić is always, I mean, the first example everybody will pull out. And this was happening while we all the time were talking about democratically Serbia is moving in the opposite direction. This is from 2018.
Okay.
2018, and this is from this year. And this is from Zagreb, actually. This is the demonstration of Zagreb University students in support for Serbian students who were for more than a year now having these anti-corruption demonstrations, which were not enough covered in the Western Europe, not enough talked about in the EU. So one of these banners that one of the students is showing, it's the one that you see, it's mixed with black and red color. It says like, why is EU silent on this question? And they have the Li, the chemical sign for the lithium, because we heard the word before about strategic alignment. And in terms of Serbia, recently it's been a lot of talk about a strategic agreement with Serbia about electric batteries and so on and so on. So situation in Serbia is that there are also some interests that have been very much in power while the country has been moving in the wrong direction. So we would rather choose to be silent on some issues than on the other ones, which created this situation. I'm showing this picture actually mostly to show that in the first one, you saw the thing that they say that the EU is actually hurting its own credibility by choosing stability rather than democracy. And in the second picture, we're actually seeing some that are proving us that EU's credibility in Balkan countries is actually very low at the moment. And this is probably originally the most pro-EU part of the population, students in both countries. So this is very much danger. I think this is very relevant in terms of talking about geopolitics or democracy, because we are about maybe to lose the most pro-democratic part of the population in countries like Serbia, but maybe also some of these other countries, not because they are turning towards Russia, but they actually, when they asked about EU, they are saying that there's been a raise of number of people who are saying not relevant, because for them EU is not relevant any longer, because what they hoped EU would have done by combating Vučić. I was going to say Milosevic, not far from each other. Anyway, they've been disappointed, so to say. And this is, as I said, it's very difficult to talk about Western Balkans as one thing. So I'll start by giving this example of Serbia. But it's, I mean, there are some things that go all over the countries, but there are also differences between the countries.
Thank you so much, Zlatko. We'll get back to you, I'm sure, later. Eben, how do you see the Commission in all this? I mean, are they riding two horses at the same time? And what's really going on? I was also wanting to ask Frank about this gradual, fuzzy integration. I mean, how can you keep an internal market running with common rules if countries are partly in, partly out? I mean, if you are a lawyer, you would go up under the roof with such an idea. So how do you see the Commission? How are they doing in all of this?
I think Frank's slide clearly showed that, yes, the Commission is playing both horses. They have to. They have to believe that you can attain a geopolitical enlargement, but they also have to believe in sort of the transformative power of the enlargement process. So yes, they're definitely using gradual integration as that bridge to try to connect the two dots, the geopolitical and the transformative process of the enlargement. So they're definitely trying to do that. It's true, you cannot have sort of a partly integration in the single market, but you can do a lot of other things in gradual integration, and you're doing it. And in this process, the Commission is trying to be very pragmatic, trying to make some, and they say that clearly, very tangible benefits for the candidate countries. So they're trying to give something to the candidate states that the general population in the candidate countries can also feel, like the single European payment area and Rome like home and all of these initiatives that might sound a little boring, but that the citizens on the ground can actually feel. But there is also, and Frank also mentioned this, so I'm just going to repeat it, there's probably a time issue here. And you can only do this to a certain extent. And there are some things that you cannot sort of make up in little parcels and give to the candidate countries. And one of them is the full integration into the single markets. I mean, but you can still offer Erasmus Plus, you can still offer participation in science programs, in all kinds of other programs that the EU have available, and they have them available also for the Western Balkans. And they have also invented this new financial instrument, the Ukraine facility, with a lot of billions in it. That is also going to be, as far as I read the next MFF, the next budget proposal, they're going to increase that amount also for the candidate countries. So in that sense, the Commission is showing political will. And what is also interesting about the Commission, I think, in this whole process, is that if they were a member state, they would be sort of in the geopolitical camp. At least that's how I read it. So even though they are concerned about rule of law, because they have to be, and they're also concerned about the sort of transformative process, and they're also aware that a lot of these countries are far from living up to what we call the Copenhagen Criteria. But they also know, they have also sensed politically that if they don't push on this process, if they don't try to bridge the gaps, the enlargement process will get stalled. And that's due to something we haven't really touched that much upon. You talked about lacking political will, but the discussion is a little broader than that. It's about the absorption capacity, and that is mentioned again, particularly by states that want to see the European project survive, so to speak, and live up to certain rule of law standards. And we can look at countries like Belgium, countries like the Netherlands, will always argue in this direction that they're not against enlargement, but they want these countries to be ready before they enter, because we have less good experience with some member states.
And I would like to ask you a question that you can answer later, because now it's Charlotte's turn. But I would like to hear even your view on the suggestion by the Commissioner that you should, and Frank also mentioned that you should actually include the much stricter rule of law conditionality in the new treaties when you actually take countries in. But let's get back to that. I'm sure other people in the room will also ask that. Charlotte, what about security? Now we have the 28-point plan coming from Trump. I mean, how does the whole security situation influence enlargement? Could you say a few words? Has it become more pertinent or less pertinent over the past years with the war in Ukraine? It's almost a self-evident answer.
Well, first of all, I think the war in Ukraine finally exposed the EU's immediate biggest geopolitical security challenge, which is the absence of a functioning European security architecture, and a lack of a strategy for deterrence and application of hard power. And this is when Gorbachev had a dream about a transit, a sort of a common house from the transatlantic to the Urals. We formed the OSCE out of this, the CSCE, to actually be that security architecture. But with the way Russia has acted and everything, we can see that OSCE today is redundant. We have the Council of Europe, which has the normative framework but does not provide security. So we don't have a security framework for neither the EU membership countries nor the applicant countries.
We have NATO.
Well, it doesn't take everything, and what happens is that choosing to become member of the EU becomes dangerous for some countries, such as Georgia. You could say, now we had the Georgian ambassador, and not that we know exactly how Georgian Dream would act, but it is true that some people voted for Georgian Dream because they were afraid of the security and the aggression from Russia. Moldova chose democracy recently over security and faces hybrid attacks and the threat of aggression if Ukraine cannot stand against Russia. And Ukraine has chosen democracy over security. So in many ways, you could say that the lack of a security architecture in Europe is actually some of the reasons why we stand where we stand today. And it's a bit the discussion that we have, is EU at all relevant in security? And I guess this is where we're trying to become relevant, but the enlargement itself is a way to become relevant in terms of security. Because you could say until recently, when we didn't have this discussion around the enlargement process, we had a Europe that was divided into EU countries and non-European countries. And that in itself created a lot of lack of, when you're standing there looking in, it actually makes things worse. And this, I think, Frank really showed that the decline in democracy, decline in rule of law in these countries was probably faster than if they had become members at an earlier stage. And that is why it's so important that we actually have an understanding of the enlargement process also in terms of security. It's also the fact that they become, as Frank also said, proxies for influence in these countries which are not members of the EU. It's also, of course, you can also be a member state and become a battlefield, but they are more exposed to become battlefields for influence and power struggles. So that is also again an argument, I think, for enlargement process.
Can I pass it over to, then you can come back with the last page you have, because otherwise I think we will Ole, you probably only want to talk about Ukraine, but that's certainly also very interesting. So I think that I have to ask you about first how you look upon the democracy situation in Ukraine with the current scandal of corruption, but also the political system. I read a very interesting article, I think it was in Politico, I can't remember if it was there, but that's also doesn't matter, where the journalist said either this is very good that it comes to the table that there are corruption, because that shows that all the hidden corruption all of a sudden comes to the forefront, and we can do something about it. Or it's really bad, and it might have some bad consequences in terms of people turning their sympathy away from Ukraine. So is it good? Is it bad that we hear about these new cases? And how do you see Ukraine right now in terms of its commitment to the European project?
Well, thank you very much indeed, and let me say first of all, I speak in a personal capacity because I'm no longer the Danish ambassador to Ukraine. That's my good colleague Thomas Lund Sørensen. So, and there is a minister, well, several ministers. So I'm speaking here in a personal capacity.
We are happy for that.
And to answer your question, I think that many Ukrainians would say that it's bad news that corruption scandals at the very highest level are surfacing now, but they would also say, but it's good that we have the tools to reduce the risk and to actually do something about it. And this is actually what is happening. The anti-corruption institutions in Ukraine, they're actually working. They have teeth. They can actually bite. And this is what you're seeing these days. And I think that's a good news. And this is not least because of Ukraine's status as a candidate country, because this is, and I just brought for those of you who are interested in following Ukraine's progress, I brought the latest progress report. It's 100 pages done by the Commission. It's very, very thorough. It has a separate section on the rule of law, anti-corruption. And this is a good example of how brutal the accession process is. You tend to think about EU accession or something nicer. Money will be coming big time, but it's also very brutal. There was somebody who said that it's not a negotiating process, it's a negotiated surrender, because what you have to do is basically to adopt the acquis, the legislation, but also the Copenhagen Criteria. And if you remember what happened this summer, there were attempts to reduce the independence of the anti-corruption institutions. What happened? Well, two things happened, and I was still there in Kiev at that time. There were demonstrations outside the presidential office. There were blue flags. There were, and of course the Ukrainian flag, and there were also strong international reactions. And this was what probably, in combination, made Ukraine move in the right direction. So I think if you ask Ukrainians, and I did that very often, anytime or on most occasions when I met Ukrainians, I would ask, why is the European Union so great? They would give two reasons. One is security. They would say, look, there's never an EU country that has been attacked by Russia. So security is a very important aspect. It is not a coincidence that Ukraine handed in its EU application 4 days after the full-scale Russian aggression. I don't know if you remember that. I do, because
it's very quickly after. Yes.
The Russians were in the suburbs of Kiev. You could hear the artillery fire, and what happened? They handed in this EU application, and I know from good sources in Brussels that there was a bit of this was not really what they expected in this situation. So what happened was that they sent them 4,000 pages of forms to fill out, and then they thought, okay, now the Ukrainians, they will be busy doing that for at least 1 year, but no, it took 2 months. Then the forms were filled out, and then the whole process acquired its own dynamics, and then there was the decisions in 22 already in the summer that created the dynamics that also benefited other countries like Moldova, for instance, that also filed an application at the same time.
They actually had a good graph, Moldova, one.
Yeah. So this security is a very important aspect, but also the transformative power of being an EU member, a candidate for EU membership, because that is creating a dynamics that is not present domestically. There needs to be that pressure. This is, I think, the reply you would get from most Ukrainians. And will it be difficult? Yes, it will. Will it be possible in 5 years, as the Ukrainians are saying? Well, maybe, if they can. It's a merit-based process. And
but it's not. I mean,
well, I don't think that looking at the present members of the European Union, the EU institutions, they would not accept any loopholes, any shortcuts in terms of. I think the dynamics would be as they were back when there was the Eastern enlargement. I remember that. I was not involved in any kind of prominent role, but I was following this. And back then there was the so-called regatta principle applying. And what is the regatta principle? That's like a sailing regatta. You have sailboats, and some are moving faster than others. And those who are fastest and crosses the finishing line, they become members. I think this will be I hope, the dynamics that we'll see again.
You will be allowed to say something in a short second. I just wondered, thank you very much, Ole. Frank, if you have any comments to the panel, or any comments, things you have reflected on while listening to...
I've spoken so much,
okay,
not for now. Yeah.
Then we will open up, and I can already see some hands. We have a microphone coming over here. I think Lucas. So say your name and where you're from. We collect a few, so up with your hand if you want to say something. Yes, after that. Lucas first.
Thank you. My name is Lucas Honoré. I'm a former student here, working with the Ministry of Business and Industry, and then I'm also chairing the youth section of the Foreign Policy Society. I have one question and one follow-up on Mathi's question from before. My first question, or my question, is dealing with the question of opening chapters without anonymity. I remember in the beginning of the Danish presidency, there was this question, a rather creative solution. Could we actually open new chapters in negotiations without having unanimity in the council? I'm not sure if that question has been resolved fully yet, but I would like to have your reflections on it. That'd be very interesting. And secondly, following up on Mathi's question from before, if we envision a future with more member states, will the passerelle clauses be more institutionalized? Will we see that they will be used more frequently if it will not have treaty changes? And adjacent to that, is the EPC kind of look ahead on what is coming?
We have a gentleman down here in Mathis. You also wanted to say? Okay. So you afterwards. We take 3 and then we go back to the panel.
Thank you very much. My name is Jens Dalsgaard. I'm a historian. I worked for a long time with the EU, which is now called Erasmus Plus programs. Before that, a number of other names. Going through the last couple of years, I've been very concerned about the role of Hungary and Poland and now Slovakia, and we've witnessed the elections in Romania, which was very much close. So what are the risks of actually engaging on a huge enlargement with populations and governments and systems which are not strictly committed to democratic structures and the rule of law and human rights and individual freedoms? What kind of pressure will it put on the European Union? And a question which hasn't been covered at all, and you probably can't answer it, but what are the costs? What does it mean for all the programs and policies of the European Union right now? For instance, including the agricultural territory of Ukraine in common policies, just as one small part of it. So, thank you.
Thank you. We just take Mathis. You also raise your hand. Do you want to? Yes. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I just thought the beginning of a small debate between you, Iben, and Ole was interesting because what is actually the Commission's role in this, and who's the ones pushing for membership, and who would be interested in a process which were not that merit-based, if that was the analysis that we needed to move forward because of geopolitics. I just wanted your reflections on that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I will ask you first if you would like to reflect on anything that has been said, and then I will move to the rest of the panel.
Yeah, maybe to Lucas. Yes, there has been this debate. I don't think it has been resolved in favor of giving up the veto on all of the openings of chapters. One of the reasons was, well, in the end, you need to have unanimity anyways. Yeah? So, I mean, moving further now by sidelining some of the member states will in the end come back to haunt you. But I think there is an understanding now that Hungary blocks basically the opening of accession chapters, that informally you move ahead anyways. Yeah. So I mean, say at the working group level, yeah, things are moving ahead even without a formal opening of the chapter, so that when hopefully the time comes, yeah, in which it can be formally opened, yeah, that then basically it can move really fast because everything has been prepared. And I think already now the only way in which treaty reform is imaginable is through the use of the passerelle clauses, because I mean I don't think that any of the member states has an appetite for, let's say, formal treaty reform, intergovernmental conferences, domestic ratification, and all. I take this one.
Yes. Yeah. Anyone else want to jump in here? Iben?
Just to follow up my comment about the process, when you say the process is merit-based, it sounds a little bit automatic, and then you kind of tend to forget that you also need unanimity a lot of times during the negotiation process with candidate countries. And what we see at the moment is, of course, Hungary blocking, but we also have bilateral issues between North Macedonia and Bulgaria now, and it used to be with Greece. So, and when you go into the Western Balkans, there are tons of these bilateral issues that for one reason or another you will have one single country blocking, and that's not based on merit. That's not based on how far in the process you are. And I think that's that's why I think maybe this discussion should be actually about merit-based versus geopolitical versus internally EU stuff. Because there's a lot of internal EU issues that also block this process. And I think that's also part of the frustration that you were alluding to before in the process, that you seem to be doing your homework, so to speak, but you can still be blocked, like Hungary has done for the past year. And the Danish EU presidency is working on trying to unblock it, but they have not been able to. Then just on the costs of this enlargement, here it's really about Ukraine. Because if you look into the cost of getting these other countries into the EU, they're relatively small. The think tank Bruegel did a study, I think, about less than a year ago when they looked at, with the current budget rules, how much would it cost to actually absorb some of these smaller candidate countries. And it's not something that's going to be very hard for the EU. But of course, Ukraine, the agricultural policy, it will be a difficult one to swallow.
Charlotte?
Some questions,
You want to answer? Yeah, okay, after, yeah. Good.
Okay, I think like turning again to security, I think I want to return to the fact that we have a sort of broken continent, which is that we have the EU and then we have the non-EU. And actually where you could say that the EU was a peace project, to some degree it has become the source of non-peace, because all the non-EU member countries are sort of left on outside. And we need to find a mechanism to create that architecture in which to include the and this is of course the enlargement process is part of it, but I think there needs to be more thinking around it, which is not just the enlargement, but enlargement is part of it, so that security, understanding why it's important to have a framework that not allows for proxy influences or includes maybe coalition of the willing, where you have that discussion of why is now the EU is not the key actor in this space, but it's actually countries from the European space that are part of it. So we have to understand things will become much more flexible and fluid, but we have to be open to that also within the EU, understanding the role of the EU within a larger European framework.
Yes, Zlatko, you wanted to jump in here?
Thank you. Even what you said actually got me back to what I was also going to say previously. It's that this is maybe the thing of like one country blocking the other country is why such a like fuzzy membership, this in-between relation could work for some countries, because I've been seeing that several countries are now talking about like, let's rush in, then we can be the ones dictating. For instance, Serbia to Kosovo, or Montenegro to Bosnia, or Albania to North Macedonia. So for that case, that could be something that will work, that will solve some of these issues, because we had them, like Slovenia, Croatia, as you said, Greece, North Macedonia, and so on and so on. But on the other side, if we talk about this fuzzy membership, I think it's also very important, again, Western Balkans is different thing. For Montenegro, definitely it will feel like step back, because they feel we're already there. Why should we get into something that it's only half membership? But for Kosovo, it will be dream, because it's almost unattainable. So it will also create some kind of conflict and again, a perception, ideas that some countries are treated better than others countries, which is kind of widespread across the region.
Yes, Ole?
Yeah, on the idea of opening chapters without consensus, this is actually what is happening right now. Technical work is actually going on, as you mentioned, when it comes to Ukraine's EU candidacy. So a lot of the work is ongoing, and I think the Ukrainians are hoping for the day when the political factors in one member state will disappear. Or
maybe he will not be re-elected in April.
And in the meantime, they want to catch up, and I think this is also in our interest that the reform process in Ukraine that has to happen, that this is continuing. I wanted to make one comment, if I may, on what you said about this idea of differentiated membership or fuzzy membership. If you were to ask Ukrainians, they would say, no, we don't want anything less than the full package for exactly the reasons I said, security and the transformation of their own society, because they know that this will not happen unless there is this outside pressure. So I don't think that would be a very attractive option. Also because the Ukrainians are actually united in their support for EU membership. And this was actually different before the war. I still remember when I was traveling, especially in eastern Ukraine before the war, and I always asked mayors that I met, okay, what about EU membership? And some of them in the Russian-speaking part of Ukraine were said, no, we want to be in the middle. Can't we be some sort of middle country between east and west? Nobody is saying that anymore for very, very obvious reasons, because they have seen what is happening even in the Russian-speaking parts of Ukraine. There's nobody having any idea of being in between. They are actually united. Will they stay like that? Well, I think at least for a certain period of time, but it's not something that you can take for granted. I think the same dynamics that you have seen in other countries could certainly appear. Elections will happen at some point, and we shouldn't take it for granted. So it's important that progress is achieved all the time to reassure the Ukrainians that they are on track and that we are ready.
I would like to ask the panel, 2 weeks ago, Marta Kos, the Enlargement Commissioner, had this very interesting article in Financial Times where she said, I mentioned it slightly before, or in brief before, where she said, and I would like to hear your view first, well, maybe what we have to do is simply to put it into the treaties, the enlargement, the accession treaties, that there will be stricter rules when it comes to backsliding. Then you will be member, but there will be different rules applying to you, not just Ukraine, but all the countries coming in. Would that not be a solution? I mean, I know it's been discussed earlier, but it's the first time I heard it come out of a commissioner's mouth as a possibility. And what do you think now? You say they do not want part membership, but what if they got full membership, but with the condition that they could be kicked out again, or at least taken their membership voting rights away, or been helped? You know, there's this phrase in the Commission that we all the technical work that is done is actually, like during the financial crisis when all the German bankers or tax people came to Greece to help them with with getting some taxes in the state budget, which the Greek couldn't find out how to do. So setting up a whole system where how to you actually get the revenues you need. So how would you see that? That would be a new thing, because previous enlargements, you didn't have that at all put into the treaties.
It was not put into the treaties, but there is actually a historical precedent, because Romania and Bulgaria were under, I've forgotten there's a term for it, what was it called? They were under some sort of monitoring.
Situation, yes.
This was not something that was treaty-based, but it was something that ensured that those reforms that those two countries needed to implement were actually implemented. And I don't know. I think some Ukrainians might say, yes, it's great, because we don't want any
we don't want to backslide. Yes.
And this is and again, you have to bear in mind that what what happened in 2014, what we call the Maidan revolution.
Yes.
It's called something completely different. In Ukraine, it's called the revolution of dignity. Why do they call it the revolution of dignity? Because many Ukrainians found it utterly humiliating and undignified to live in a European country that was corrupt to the bone from every level of society was just corrupt, and they hated it, and that's why they wanted the European path, and that's why it has such a strong appeal to many Ukrainians today to do the.
That's actually also what we are seeing in the youth in Serbia and several of the worst countries in the Balkans. With the young
exactly.
going into the streets for weeks and weeks and weeks, because they do not want the backsliding. Exactly. So maybe that could be a solution. What do you think?
I'm a bit skeptical. I think the history of enlargement tells us that it's much easier to get candidate countries to do things
when they're outside.
When they're still outside.
Yes.
Once they're in, it's much more difficult. Of course, it depends on the fine print. How are the decisions made?
The mechanisms.
Yeah. So I mean, this is all discussed under the term of reversibility. But who makes these decisions? With what kind of majorities? On whose initiative? Is it the Commission making a proposal? Is it then qualified majority? Does it need a consensus? All of that. But I think generally, it's a much tougher call to take something back in terms of rights and benefits that countries already have, rather than saying, okay, first you need to fulfill certain conditions and then you will get it. And that was also the logic of the CVM with Bulgaria and Romania. So I think something like that needs to be done, but anyways, I don't think, I mean, if you say the expectation is when we get in, we want to get in with, let's say, the full catalog of rights and benefits, that's an illusion. I mean, that will not happen. And that has not happened for earlier enlargement rounds either. Yeah? Agriculture was mentioned. I mean, there's no way you can immediately integrate Ukrainian agriculture into the common agricultural market. There has to be some kind of transition, and that also has to apply to other policies. So I think, and I think this has been a learning process for all new member states at some point. That has also led to disappointment. Yeah, that in order to achieve a consensus among the old member states, you need to cater to some special interests of Polish farmers, for instance, and in order to get over the line, you have to make this kind of compromises, even if you don't like it. Yeah.
Well, the EU did actually manage to shut the money box for Hungary and Poland, so there are some precedents here that they actually can do it if they want to.
That's just because the COS article was to Financial Times was given at a time where the Commission was presenting the enlargement report, and we must remember what was missing from those enlargement reports, and that was the policy review that the Commission was supposed to do in internal reforms. So I read this much more as a signal to the existing member states that this time we are not going to mess up. We are going to uphold the rule of law, and we're going to do it in the accession treaties. And I think so. It's because, as Frank also showed early on, it's much easier to get something, but to take things back. I mean, it's been part of the new methodology of the enlargement since 2018 that you can actually go down a few steps, but that hasn't happened. I mean, instead we've seen Serbia, for instance, staying, or Turkey staying at where they were. It's not like we've gone in and say, okay, then we'll close some chapters or kick you out or anything like that. So I saw the COS remark as much more a signal to the existing member states, trying to push them, including Hungary, to open negotiations with Moldova and Ukraine. So it's much more about, I think, that debate.
I think also it's very interesting, given I've seen so to say, local news, North Macedonia and Slovenia, and in terms of this. And in North Macedonia, a lot of people will think that, of course, she's influenced by what happened to us, so to say, because they were blocked first by one country, then by also what we often forget, Denmark, Netherlands, and France in 2019, and then finally Bulgaria. And the interesting thing, and this is going back to the idea of EU not only being a goal, but also being kind of means to democratize society. I've seen this a lot, like 10 years ago when Croatia got in and did a lot to combat corruption and improve on terms of rule of the law and everything. I heard it a lot among the other places in Balkans, people saying, let's use the EU to become functioning state like Croatia is becoming right now, and then we can do Iceland, as they said, meaning that then they can back out. Yeah. The most important thing was for some, because they were learning from Croatian example, where actually was the strictest rules. The rules were also even stricter later, but now many people feel that they are going a little bit to be easier to get into the EU. And from that to today, when I don't really see that any longer. Today, it's much more, they become more cynical, especially political elites. The thing is let's use the moment to get in, and then we don't need to do. We can do as many of these other countries. And I think that's where the problem is, and that's where I recognize what you, Frank, are trying to present. It's not either or, it has to be a solution that kind of satisfies both questions, so to say, or gives answer to both answers.
We are approaching the end, but if there are anyone sitting with a question in the audience, Lucas, yes? The microphone is on its way.
Thank you very much for your deliberate answers to my bit fuzzy question. Maybe I wanted to follow up on the last part of the question that was probably not very clear. Is the EPC, the European Political Community, anything that we should watch out for in this case, or has it become somewhat irrelevant? Or
I don't know who would like to answer. Maybe
I'm not an expert on the European political community, but of course it has the advantage of having the UK there, and Norway, and other non-EU member states. So it's a way of including all of Europe in a process. But of course it's not. Well, we don't know what it is yet, the EPC. So we'll just have to see.
And maybe I just like to add, I think from a security perspective, it is quite interesting because we will encompass all the aspects, and especially the UK is important from a security perspective. Norway is a very important country from a security perspective, and actually also Turkey from a security perspective. So when you look at the security cooperation, I think this community is important, and how it will affect the EU process and the EU, I think we need to say, but I think there is something that, going back to the fact that we have a continent with historic claims and roots, and how do we actually become this, create a security architecture that makes sense for everybody in that framework.
We should perhaps have had a NATO expert here as well to talk about whether NATO can develop into a European, have its own kind of European pillar that a lot of people talk about. Could I just ask you to say one final, if I give you 1 minute each, and I would actually like to raise a question here, because there's been a lot of debate in the academic literature, but also publicly, that the Commission has lately been launching fewer and fewer infringement cases and has not been doing its job in upholding the law as it used to do. There's lots of statistics out there, and colleagues I have who have actually looked into, I think we even gave it as an exam for the students last year, where they had to explain why the Commission is saying now that it's advising instead of punishing. So just to finish off, are we also seeing a change in the way the EU is acting? I mean, the argument from the Commission is that they have to advise more because there's actually a lot of the new countries that it doesn't make sense to punish them because lots of times it's about lacking capacity. And therefore they have changed a little bit their way of acting. But a lot of scholars now say that they are really doing it on purpose, that they are stepping back on enforcement, and that's a big problem. So you don't have to answer that question, but you may say, all of you, what you would like to say, but I think a few words from each of you, and then we will say thank you for today. Frank, would you start?
Yeah, I can do. I mean, I'm also aware of these studies. Yeah, but I think it's a process that has been going on for some time. I mean, say this strict focus on compliance enforcement has been replaced already. I mean, at the end of the internal market program by a number of programs, pilot, solid, yeah, where the Commission has actually tried to support member states, because I mean, compliance, as you said, is not always driven by the attempt to somehow undercut EU rules, but it is a capacity issue, yeah. And I think to make the link back to enlargement, I think looking ahead, this is going to be much more important, yeah, because all the countries that might join at some point or another will be low capacity countries, and that even with good faith, yeah, need probably a lot of support, yeah, in this process, yeah. So I think it's a very important part of the European project, not just, I mean, legal enforcement, yeah, but also capacity building.
Thank you. A lot of EU hats running around in Kiev, trying to help with simple things as building up a public administration and so on. And how did you see that when you were there?
Well, actually, Denmark has been spearheading the so-called pre-accession programs that are now being implemented. This was something that Denmark did back in
Nikolaev, right?
Well, yeah, but that's for just for one city. But I wanted to mention what Denmark did back in connection with the Eastern enlargement, because Denmark had a pre-accession program focusing on the Baltic states and to a certain extent on Poland. And this was basically technical assistance to help them getting ready for the accession negotiations. Now we're doing something similar, but we're doing it together with our Lithuanian friends, because they've been through this. Recently, they still have people in active service who has been negotiating on behalf of Lithuania when they joined. And they are now assisting Ukrainian authorities, and Denmark is supporting this financially. But I wanted to mention one thing that is very often overlooked. Also in Ukraine, when people are discussing EU membership, it's being seen as paradise. This is going to be great. The money will be coming in. Motorways will be built. But there's a tendency to overlook the so-called economic Copenhagen Criteria. We all know the political one, that's about democracy and human rights and respect for minorities, but there is the economic Copenhagen Criteria, which basically says that a candidate country should be ready to withstand the competitive pressures of the internal markets once they become a member. And I remember from Poland, I served in Poland before I came to Kiev. What happened when Poland entered the European Union was that entire industries were wiped out, retailing, construction. There was not a single, well, there might have been exceptions, but by and large, in certain sectors, the Polish economic actors were not competitive. And this caused a lot of resentment, and I think you can even today see the traces of that politically. So what I was telling our Ukrainian friends is that you need to be competitive. And by the way, Ukrainian agriculture is highly competitive. There's no subsidies, so that's probably why why European farmers are.
Yes.
It operates on but that's an exception. So in many sectors they need to be competitive. They need to build up their competitive forces. Once they join, they will be faced with the brutal
I actually saw a study saying that Poland and Ukraine 30 years ago were more or less even, and then now Poland is 40% richer.
It's true. Well, actually, back in '91,
after having joined,
back in '91, Ukraine was more affluent than Poland. And just an anecdote: there were around the central station in Kiev, there was something called the Polish market, because very, very poor Poles, they came to to Kiev with all kinds of stuff. It was cheap to get a train ticket, and then there was the so-called Polish market. And I remember this because the present mayor of Kiev told me this when I met him the first time he saw I came from Poland, and he said as a young student he was part of charity work to support those poor Poles who came to
That's
Ukraine.
A good
so
story.
they organized.
I mean,
and now there is a difference in per capita income, like 60%. It's mind-boggling. But it shows that if you choose the right path from the very beginning, and I see no reason why the same
it's really
thing
nice
should not
to end on a positive note. Just a few comments on your behalf.
Just on the infringement, I think it's even worse than that. I think there's a report coming out of the European Parliament where they say that the Commission will not publish the infringement data in the future. So it's even worse than that. I think it reflects a little bit maybe that this Commission is very political. It has a lot of political projects that it wants to accomplish, and it's not because it doesn't want to leave its role as, and of course it can't. It is the guardian of the treaty, but it also tries to find more political solutions to the many crises that the European Union is facing at the moment, and that's probably why they are less heavy on the infringement part.
Good point. Zlatko?
Yeah, maybe also a little bit on positive side to finish. Yes. Even though this may sound a little bit insensitive, but what happened since 2022 could be also positive, because EU was also maybe towards the Western Balkans in this very convenient position, like we don't do anything and we just blame them for not doing enough. So we blame the other guys. And that was really causing a lot of these problems, like Vučić, as I said. Also, EU was also gaining the access to their market. Like Serbia got huge investments over those years, and I think they also attracted way more than all the other countries combined. And now we have to rethink, and we have to think about these things. We cannot really any longer have the Balkans in this waiting room, and we can just from time to time revisit to show this is where things go wrong, and then go back and feel maybe good about ourselves as such, because at times I felt it that way, to be honest. So maybe this is pointing in a more positive direction.
Thanks. Charlotte, do you want to have a final word?
I just want to say thank you to the panel. Thank you to the moderator.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you to the panel, and thank you to the moderator. And I think, I hope that we will be able to follow up on this, because we'll see what the Danish chairmanship presents soon. Yeah, it's not over yet. And I still think it's, for me, the perspective, we had a long discussion, Marlene and I, in 2022. The whole aspect of putting the European continent together, I think, is crucial if we think of geopolitics, as well as actually also getting the potential of the candidate countries as part of the EU, that we benefit from the skilled, high-skilled workforce that exists in all the countries, and the highly, very, very imaginative and innovative people that exist, despite the institutional problems they have. So
Challenges.
that would be my final words.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming.